It's the dystopian future, year 2022. Due to a combination of overpopulation, pollution, and global warming, there's a major food shortage, and the 40 million residents of New York City are living in squalor. The main source of food comes from the evil food processing company, the Soylent Corporation, who produce high-energy vegetable concentrate known as Soylent Red and Soylent Yellow. Then, a new product enters the market, allegedly made from high-energy plankton. It's Soylent Green, and it's a hit with the population. But what's that? Soylent Green is people? Sorry to spoil a 50-year-old movie for you. If there's anything that the movie Soylent Green taught us, it's that people are delicious. Soylent Green was so much more popular than red and yellow that the people would riot when they couldn't get their hands on it. Sure, modern society tells us that this is immoral and probably really disgusting, but could cannibalism actually be a viable solution to world hunger? Let's find out. History of violence. One of the fad diets that has increased in recent years is the paleo diet. It cuts out things like grain, dairy, and refined sugar, and focuses on fish, vegetables, nuts, and lean meats. The idea is that our bodies aren't suited to handle the foods that only become available as the result of widespread farming, so we should eat like cave dwellers from the Paleolithic era. It's a cute idea, but the next time one of your friends tells you that they're on the paleo diet, feel free to call them a liar, unless of course their diet happens to be about 10% human flesh, because as it turns out, humans have an extremely long history of cannibalism. In Paleolithic times, cannibalism accounted for about 10% of a person's protein intake, and while that number decreased, it never went to zero. There are various reasons that our ancient ancestors may have engaged in cannibalism, and honestly, we don't have a concrete answer. Maybe people would have territorial disputes and decided to eat their enemies. Maybe that mammoth they went out to hunt got the better of them, but they were able to drag back the body of the hunted the animal killed and just eat that instead. It's even possible that they only did it when all other options eluded them, but the prevalence of cannibalism from that era does make this rather unlikely. There's a reasonable chance that if a person died for any reason other than disease, then hey, there's some free food. Though most of human civilization hasn't seen this level of cannibalism for a very long time, the practice did continue for a variety of different reasons. Sometimes it was a religious ritual or a way of honoring the dead. Warriors would consume parts of their fallen enemies to steal their powers. People would eat their deceased loved ones so that the person would literally be a part of them. Cannibalism was even a popular medical treatment in Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries because nothing cures syphilis quite like ground up mummy. There were countless justifications for it, but the single unifying fact was that people were just too damn tasty not to eat. The benefits and safety of cannibalism. The first major benefit of cannibalism is that you probably can't go to jail for it. Most countries don't have laws addressing the practice, though if you happen to live in the state of Idaho, there is a state law prohibiting it. Beware! Acquiring human flesh usually involves something like murder or grave robbing, so there are certainly laws impeding your ability to commit cannibalism, but we're also trying to solve world hunger here, so give us a break. For our purposes, we're just going to assume that either the government or some government-sanctioned entity like the Soylent Corporation is providing us with delicious humans to eat. Now, we've already mentioned that humans have been engaging in cannibalism for hundreds of thousands of years, but it's important to note that we aren't the only species that does this. Cannibalism is actually very common in the animal kingdom, with around 1,500 species having been found to engage in the practice. This isn't even restricted to carnivores, as herbivores and detritivores are also known to engage in cannibalism. Most interesting is why this happens. Sure, it can happen because of extreme food shortages or because humans have unnaturally affected the animal's ecosystem in some way, but it can also happen under completely normal circumstances. For example, certain tadpoles naturally engage in cannibalism to increase their chances of survival. Those tadpoles that engaged in this behavior grew faster and larger and were more physically fit than tadpoles that did not. This gave them a major competitive advantage among their species, and their increased size could act as a deterrent for predators. Now, we're obviously not suggesting that if you want to grow up to be a big and strong boy that you should eat your siblings, but if cannibalistic behavior exists in other animals and has been shown to have beneficial effects, should it not then be the same for humans? Shouldn't you be eating your brother? Or maybe much like with inbreeding, shouldn't cannibalism have some sort of detrimental side effects? As for the second question, it turns out the answer's actually no. Not really. Without having any idea where you're watching this video from, we can say with almost 100% certainty that you live somewhere that has not engaged in human cannibalism for hundreds of years. Because of our modern sensibilities, we tend to view it as immoral, disgusting, and dangerous. But it isn't really any more dangerous than eating any other sort of meat. At least mostly, but we'll get to an important exception later. One of the assumptions is that human cannibalism will result in the spread of disease. It's certainly true that if a person has some sort of blood-borne disease like hepatitis or HIV, and you consume their flesh, that you too could contract this disease. But the same is true of any other meat. The risk could be seen as higher when consuming meat from your own species, as you would be susceptible to all of the same diseases, whereas an animal that is more genetically dissimilar to you may be carrying a disease that doesn't affect humans. It's certainly possible that this is the case, but you can just kill it with fire. Almost all the concerns regarding disease from human flesh can be solved by simply cooking the meat. This is something you're probably already used to when it comes to eating other animals, because eating those animals raw could make you sick as well. But when it specifically comes to cannibalism causing an increased spread of disease, this is not something that we really see anywhere in the animal kingdom. To be fair, there hasn't been a ton of research on this topic, so it could later be proven wrong, but it also makes a lot of sense. There is a lot of cannibalism seen in various animals, but let's think back to our tadpole example from earlier. If the tadpole that was consumed had a disease, then the one that ate it would likely contract that disease now as well. But the disease didn't actually spread. It was still only in a single host body. Most cannibalism in nature occurs at this 1-to-1 ratio, so it's not an effective method of spreading disease. As such, diseases will have developed other ways by which they can spread and actually increase the number of infected instead of just transferring from one single host to another single host. As crazy as this sounds, there's actually an argument that cannibalism can reduce the spread of disease as well. If an infected person is removed from the population and consumed, that's one less living person to spread the disease. There is a good chance that cooking the meat before eating it, combined with the strong acids in our stomachs, would eliminate the possibility of getting sick by eating them. And since the body was consumed, there would be no infected carcass for flies and other scavengers to eat, meaning they could not continue to proliferate that disease. But again, there's not a lot of research in this area, and we don't recommend knowingly consuming a diseased person, even if you cook them first, or anyone for that matter. We don't recommend cannibalism here at the Science of Science Fiction. However, that does bring us to the final benefit of cannibalism, which is that it's just so damn nutritious. You need certain nutrients to survive, and as it turns out, your body is full of those nutrients. There is a lot of evidence that a cannibalistic diet allows for a more efficient conversion of nutrients. When we eat stuff like plants, there is certainly plenty of nutritional value there, but there's also a bunch of useless plant junk that our bodies can't use. And that means we need to expend energy to rid ourselves of that excess material, making the entire process less efficient. Of course, even in this scenario, a balanced diet would be important. Specimens of any species that tend to survive solely on eating their own tended to have stunted growth overall, even if it had resulted in accelerated growth during the early stages of development. Other than being frowned upon as immoral, so far cannibalism does seem like a safe and healthy solution in the event of a global food crisis. But surely there must be some downside, right? Negative consequences. When it comes to a cannibalistic population, most of the negatives associated with it come from observations in non-human animals in which they are both the predator and the prey. But we're living in a dystopian future where we don't need to worry about being hunted for food. So, can we rely on the Soylent Corporation to fairly judge who will and won't be eaten and handle the messy business of killing the people for us? Well, once the aspects of competition and survival are removed from the equation by our glorious corporate overlords, so too are most of the downsides. But there are still a couple of negative factors to observe. The first is that pound for pound, humans are not the most efficient source of calories. Yes, scientists have calculated the caloric content of a human used as food because, of course they have. Science. While we have similar calorie content to other animals of equivalent size, there are way bigger animals that we could be eating. Cows have nearly twice as many calories per pound as humans, and bears have over 3 times as many. We don't normally use them as food, so eating a bear might seem strange, but we've spent this entire episode talking about eating humans, so it's not that strange, is it? Obviously, cannibalism would reduce the population of people who needed to be fed, but depending on how we got to this catastrophic scenario, we could always try to farm more calorie-rich animals for food first. But finally, there is, of course, the elephant in the room, the disease known as Kuru. Kuru, also known as laughing sickness, is a rare, incurable, and fatal neurodegenerative disease caused by prions. Prions are misfolded proteins that will transfer their misshapen form to normal proteins that they come into contact with. These get into the nervous system and then the brain, and essentially turn people's brains into sponges full of giant holes. It's mad cow disease, except it's for humans. Symptoms begin with difficulty walking, a loss of coordination, and difficulty speaking. As the disease progresses, the infected will experience tremors, depression, and emotional instability, and uncontrollable bouts of laughter. Within about a year of the first symptoms being observed, the disease becomes fatal. Despite being an incredibly rare condition, the 4 people of Papua New Guinea experienced 300 deaths per year from Kuru, despite a population of only about 12,000. It was discovered that the cause of this spread was their ritualistic cannibalism. When a person died, their body would be consumed by their loved ones. While the men generally only ate muscles, the women and children would consume the brain that was infected with prions. After an incubation period of anywhere between 5 and 50 years, those that consumed the brains would begin to exhibit the first symptoms of Kuru. So as it turns out, there is one major and terrifying reason not to engage in cannibalism, but that can be solved by just not eating the brain. Easy! Wrap up. It's hard to theorize what exact set of circumstances would actually necessitate such a drastic solution, but it turns out that yes, cannibalism is absolutely a viable solution to world hunger. It's a practice that exists all throughout the animal kingdom. It's one that humans engaged in for hundreds of thousands of years, and as long as we cook our food and don't eat the brains, it isn't any more dangerous than consuming any other type of meat. For those of us in Western society, we look at cannibalism like cousin marriage. It seems a bit weird, a bit gross to us, but it worked just fine for humanity for hundreds of thousands of years. And if options are running out, it's better than nothing. Thanks for watching.